Let's talk a little bit more about agenting. Something specific I wanted to ask you is your client, Kate Hannigan. Her novel, The Detective's Assistant, won the 2016 Golden Kite Award. It was a book list editor's choice. It garnered several other bits of official praise. Obviously, Kate Hannigan was probably doing an extreme happy dance. That had to be a good moment for her.
Yeah.
In fact, Ms. Hannigan, if you're listening, please come on the podcast. Tell us about it. We'd love to hear. But what's that like for you as the agent of the book that's winning all the awards and that everyone loves?
Well, I mean, it's delightful. I think that the especially delightful thing is when you see the good stuff start to snowball, and that's how it feels when good stuff starts to happen for a book. It doesn't it's like this epiphenomenon that descends itself upon you. It just the good news starts to roll in, and then it kind of feeds upon itself. And it does really feel like it has its own momentum after a while, which is just a lot of fun to be along for that ride. But as an agent, what's so great about it is just seeing good stuff happen to such deserving people. And Kate Hannigan is definitely, at the top of the deserving heap. She's she's somebody who has worked really hard for years, not just on her own work, but in developing support networks for writers in her community. She started a SCBWI branch in her neighborhood, which is Hyde Park, Chicago. So she's, constantly doing a lot of hard work and outreach to make sure that she gets great speakers for her community. She also does some blogging, interviewing authors. So she's just done a lot of kind of groundwork layering. And so it's great to see some of that hard work really pay off. And it's interesting. Kate, she talks about having had this kind of eureka moment when she was sort of in that struggling part of her career early on, where she had a longtime critique group, and one of her very valued critique partners took her aside after a particularly frustrating critique session. And her critique partner said, Kate, when are you going to start taking yourself seriously as a writer? And somehow that statement really resonated with her. And she somehow realized that she was kind of not taking she was not taking kind of a professional, she wasn't taking an approach to her writing that would give it center stage as a career in her life. It was moving it from like hobby or kind of an airy-fairy calling and moving it to center stage so she could really double down on kind of figuring out what stories she wanted to tell and how best to go about telling them. Detective's Assistant, for people who haven't read it, is a historical novel with kind of structurally interesting, a historical novel with a factual core. It's based around Kate Warren, who was one of the earliest, if not the earliest female detective in the United States. She was a Pinkerton detective, and she solved many true history sorts of crimes in her work with the Pinkerton Agency. And the spin that Kate brought to it is that she invented a niece of Kate Warren who loses her family into various forms of tragedy, and comes to live with Kate as her ward in Chicago. And so she kind of has a, front seat view to the mystery solving that Kate Ward does with the Pinkerton Agency. And it crests to this wonderful climax that happens to involve Abraham Lincoln, which is a true story. So there's a lot of curriculum tie-ins with this book because it involves some actual history. There's this great feisty woman at the center of it, and then this empowering girl character. And I think in telling that story, Kate had really figured out what she wanted to do with her writing talent, which is to tell stories about stories that are driven by girls. And she's since then really been doing that in all of the work that she's done so far. In fact, I'm really glad you asked about Kate, actually, because I'm sure you didn't know this, but her next book just came out last week, released August 6th. I brought it, actually, show it to you. And this one also has that kind of combination of history and fueled by girls. Here is, can you see it? I actually can't see myself.
I can.
It's called Cape.
One.
And it's got this awesome, shiny Art Deco cover, which is pretty fabulous. It's the League of Secret Heroes series, and it also is it's kind of an unusual approach for Kate in that it also has hybrid graphic novel components. So mostly fiction, sort of in a Brian Selznick way, but with these graphic novel interludes. So that's been kind of fun to work on with her. But again, it's a book that really continues to build her brand, so to speak. I kind of hate that brand building term because I don't like marketing speak, but I think that it's often a really important thing for a writer to kind of figure out, so that, no matter what format you're writing in, you're always sort of intentional about, how you're kind of developing the space you take up in the marketplace. So yeah, that's Kate. She's great, and please read her new book.
Well, I did know that her book came out last week, just to give people kind of a little bit of a behind the scenes preview. This is a little bit of how I operate, as I was going to wait until tomorrow and then send her an email and say, well, hello, Kate. I see you have a new book to promote. I just chatted with your agent. We love you. Why don't you come on the show? So hopefully in the near future, we'll be chatting with Kate Hannigan. That'll be fantastic. And if not, we'll catch her next book. I wanted to ask you about working with authors just in general. Obviously, there's some difference, I assume, between when you were working with authors as an editor for Dutton and working with authors editorially now. Do you work with authors editorially before you're going out on submission? Or do you like them to have the manuscript pretty well ready to go, and you let the editor that you select have the fun of getting involved with the revision on that?
Well, I'm a very editorially driven agent. I think that probably partly comes from my background in editorial, but I think it also is something of a tradition within the larger Andrea Brown Literary Agency. I think all of us are pretty much believers in the idea that, the more polished and developed you can get a manuscript pre-submission, the greater your chances are of making a really good sale. So I think all of us spend quite a bit of time on development with our clients. I think that the picture changes somewhat if it's like a re-up with an editor. So, if the editor has already worked on book one and, there's 2 more books under contract, or if this is just a follow-up novel that's not under contract, sometimes I won't take quite such a heavy hand, because I think it's important, once an editorial relationship has been established between a writer and the editor, I don't really want to kind of fool with that or risk moving the manuscript in a direction that's different from the direction the editor would go with it. But before an author has a ongoing editorial relationship with somebody, or if it's a new kind of format or genre for them, so we're maybe looking for a different editorial home for that project, that's when I'll really double down on the editorial. And sometimes I think for the detective's assistant, I'm sure I drove Kate crazy, but I think I probably sometimes write 7-page single-spaced editorial letters. So it's a pretty rigorous process, and I always go into it making sure that clients know that, you're going to be going through this process with me, and you better really love this manuscript, because you're going to also go through it once you get an editor on board. So, be prepared for quite a bit of editorial. You'd better be very committed to this project.
So how